I'd been gone for 3 weeks straight, hammering out the final details of a contract in Seattle that would lock in my company's stability for the next 5 years. The whole flight home, my mind wasn't on spreadsheets or handshakes. It was on the ranch, the place my grandfather had poured his life into and soul into, the land that had carried the Morrison name proudly for 3 generations. So, when I turned onto Ranch Road and saw that screaming, orange sold sign bolted across the wrought iron gate that had greeted me since childhood, my foot slammed the brakes so hard the rental car fishtailed and the tires hulled against the gravel. There, parked in my driveway as it belonged, there sat a moving truck. 2 burly guys in matching gray t-shirts were hauling cardboard boxes toward my front porch, while a woman in sunglasses and a sun hat waved her arms like an air traffic controller. My pulse thundered in my ears as I killed the engine, threw the door open, and marched straight at them. "Excuse me," I said, voice shaking with barely contained fury, "but what in the hell do you think you're doing on my land?" The woman spun around, clutching a clipboard against her chest like a shield. "Oh, you must be the prior owner. Hi, I'm Sandra Hutchinson. We closed on the property yesterday in an HOA foreclosure auction. Absolute steal, at $25,000. The earth tilted under my boots. What HOA? This ranch has been Morrison land for 70 years. We are not, and have never been, part of any homeowners association." Sandra's tan drained to chalk. "But Riverside Estates HOA said the property was seriously delinquent on assessments. They had the lien documents, the notices, everything looked official. And that's when the name clicked into place like the final round in a revolver. Karen Henderson, self-crowned empress of the cookie-cutter subdivision that butted up against the eastern fence line of the ranch. Except the ranch wasn't in her kingdom. We sat a full mile outside her manicured borders. Wrapped in agricultural zoning, my grandfather had fought tooth and nail to protect. When developers came circling in the 80s, 45 acres of rolling Texas hill country, bought outright in 1954 by William Morrison with the money he'd saved serving in Korea. He'd framed the house himself, ran cattle until the market shifted, then switched to boarding horses. When he died 5 years ago, he left it to me, free and clear. No mortgage, no liens, no debt. I paid the property taxes every year on autopilot from a dedicated account. Everything was perfect, or so I'd believed. Karen Henderson had been president of Riverside Estates HOA for 3 years, and the horror stories from friends trapped inside her gates were legendary. $1,000 fines for grass half an inch too long. Citations because someone dared paint their mailbox eggshell instead of beige. Board meetings that lasted until midnight while Karen banged her gavel like a judge. 6 months earlier, the first letter had shown up, typed on fancy letterhead, "Dear homeowner, following a recent boundary expansion vote, your property at 4578 Ranch Road is now within Riverside Estates covenants. Enclosed. Please find your retroactive assessment of 3,600. I'd laughed out loud and dropped it in the trash. You can't just vote someone else's sovereign land into your subdivision. That's not how Texas law works. But the letters kept coming. One claimed our century-old split rail fence violated height restrictions. Another fined us for livestock noise pollution because the horses sometimes whinnied at sunrise. Each demanded was more ridiculous than the last. Each one fed straight to the burn barrel. Then they started arriving by certified mail. I refused every signature. Let Karen waste her stamps. I had a business to run and a legacy to protect. The biggest mistake of my life. While I was 3,000 miles away closing deals, Karen was busy, filing fraudulent affidavits of service with the county, forging my signature on return receipts, building a paper trail thick enough to convince a distracted clerk that I'd been properly notified and had ignored every warning, and then, with no public notice in the newspaper, no posting on the courthouse door, nothing to alert me or my lawyer or me, she and her rubber stamp board held a quiet foreclosure auction. Her brother-in-law's company, Lone Star Holdings LLC, purchased my birthright for $25 grand, less than what I had tied up in tack and horseflesh alone. Sandra and her husband thought they'd scored the deal of the century on a distressed ranch property, paid cash, got the keys, hired the movers. Now here we all stood in the driveway I'd learned to ride a bike on, staring at each other while the scope of Karen Henderson's scam sank in. I dialed the one number I knew by heart. "David," I said the second my attorney picked up. "Get out to the ranch right now. Somebody just stole my grandfather's land, and I need it back today." While we waited for David to fight his way through Austin traffic, I managed to convince Sandra and the movers to stop unloading. Trucks idled. Boxes sat stacked on the porch. Nobody spoke. We all just stared at the orange sign mocking us from the gate, waiting for the cavalry or the apocalypse, whichever showed up first. Sandra's excitement had already curdled into panic by the time David screeched up the driveway in his black Suburban, a sheriff's deputy riding shotgun. For the next 3 hours, we stood in the late afternoon heat while David and the deputy peeled back the layers of Karen's paper empire like it was tissue in a rainstorm. The forgeries were almost comically brazen. My signature, scrawled in 3 different styles of handwriting. HOA meeting minutes dated for nights the board had never actually met. And a lien filed with the county clerk that carried the raised seal of a notary public who'd been dead since 2023. Karen's fatal mistakes were everywhere. The Riverside Estates Charter, recorded in 1998, drew a hard boundary line 1 full mile east of my gate. Lone Star Holdings LLC, the buyer at auction, listed Karen's brother-in-law as managing member and Karen herself as secretary. Conflict of interest thick enough to choke on. The deputy took statements from me, from Sandra, from the movers, then radioed in a criminal complaint on the spot. David, meanwhile, worked his phone like a man possessed, waking up a district judge until he found one willing to sign an emergency temporary restraining order freezing any further transfer of title. By sunset, the courthouse had it on file, and Sandra, now thoroughly terrified she'd bought stolen property, agreed to leave every box exactly where it sat. The next 14 days were a blur of subpoenas, search warrants, and sleepless nights. David's paralegals unearthed 2 other attempted land grabs on the edge of the subdivision. Both stalled only because those owners had fought back sooner. Bank records showed Karen siphoning HOA dues into a private account she used to pay legal expenses for her annexation crusade. Residents of Riverside Estates had been funding their own neighbor's robbery without ever knowing it. Photoshopped violation notices, forged certified mail receipts, fake emails from county officials. It all came tumbling out when the money trail crossed state lines through wire transfers. The FBI white-collar squad stepped in and turned a local fraud into a federal felony territory 3 months to the day after I'd come home to that orange sign. The courtroom in Travis County was standing room only. Half the subdivision showed up in stunned solidarity. The other half came for the spectacle. Local news cameras lined the back wall. Karen sat rigid at the defense table, lipstick perfect, hair sprayed, hair unmoving, but her hands trembled against the wood. The prosecutor rolled through 32 counts of fraud, 18 counts of forgery, conspiracy, theft, and embezzlement. Each charge punctuated by another blown-up exhibit of her own handiwork projected on the screen. When residents saw their own signatures faked on minutes they'd never voted on, audible gasps rippled through the gallery. I kept my testimony short and flat. My family has owned that land since 1954. We never joined in HOA. We were never legally served. The auction was a lie from the first forged letter to the last fake deed. David followed with a slow, methodical dismantling that left Karen's attorney stammering about good faith mistakes. Then came the email chain between Karen and her brother-in-law. Can't believe the city boy didn't even notice. Flip it in 6 months, and we split 1.2 easily. Another, he's too busy flying first class to check his own mailbox. Lol. The judge didn't blink. Guilty on every single count. Civil judgment first. Sale declared void ab initio. Lone Star Holdings ordered to refund the Hutchinsons their $25,000 within 10 days. Karen personally liable for $250,000 in attorney fees and punitive damages. Then the criminal sentence. 8 years of federal prison on the wire fraud and conspiracy counts, 3 concurrent on embezzlement. Lifetime prohibition from ever serving in any fiduciary capacity again, including, the judge added with visible satisfaction, any homeowners association anywhere in the United States. The gavel cracked like a rifle shot. Karen lurched to her feet, face cycling from crimson to ghost white. Your Honor, please. I was only trying to protect property values. Those horses and that ugly old fence were dragging the whole neighborhood down. I'm a pillar of this community. The judge leaned forward, voice like glacier ice. Mrs. Henderson, you attempted to steal a 70-year family legacy because you didn't like the aesthetics of livestock. You forged documents, embezzled from your own neighbors, and committed federal felonies to do it. 8 years is a gift. As the marshals moved in, Karen whipped toward me, wild, spit flying. This is your fault, she shrieked. If you just paid the damn dues like a normal person, none of this would have happened. They cuffed her right there. The last thing, Riverside Estates, former queen saw as they marched her out, was every person in that courtroom, including half her former subjects staring back in contempt. The orange sign came down the next morning. I burned it in the fire pit that night, drank a toast to my grandfather with a bottle of his favorite bourbon, and listened to the horses nicker softly in the pasture he'd built with his own hands. Some kingdoms fall harder than others.